A 12-year-old boy stands alone in a dark, empty house at midnight, folding his own laundry because there's no one left to do it for him. His father isn't due home for 3 more weeks. But tonight he walks through that door early, and what he finds will end with 9 families getting their stolen inheritances back, a criminal empire collapsing in 5 days, and a locket that vanished 6 years ago finally coming home. Betrayal rarely announces itself with a slammed door. It shows up quietly in the small logistics of a household. Who gets packed for, who gets cooked for, and who at 12 ends up alone in the dark washing his own clothes because nobody else will. Anger is loud and burns out fast. Patience is quiet, and it keeps receipts. The man in this story had 5 days while the people who hurt his son were out at sea, unreachable, sipping drinks they never paid for. Dalton Creel could tell you if a signature was real just by glancing across a table. He could tell you what a person was worth too, not in dollars, but in character. Dalton was a certified estate and fine art appraiser, the man banks and probate courts called when someone died and left behind a house full of things that might be junk or might be a fortune. He'd grown up watching his mother clean houses in the wealthy part of the county. A single mum working 2 jobs who repeated one rule like a prayer. We don't take what isn't ours because a thing you steal never stops belonging to somebody else. Dalton built his career on that sentence. Provenance, he liked to say, is just a story you can prove. He'd testified in courtrooms, caught forged prints and faked historical letters, and earned a reputation across Maryland that meant something. If Creel signed off on it, it was real. His wife, Celia, had been the other half of that life. They met at a flea market where she outbid him on a box of broken pocket watches, then offered to split it with him. She restored old jewelry at a bench by the window of their house on Tillman Street. When their son Rory was born, she hung a tiny brass compass above his crib and told him it would always point home. Rory grew up quiet and precise, the kind of kid who lined his crayons up by height and took apart the toaster at 7 just to put it back together better. He was 9 when Celia got sick, 10 when she died. In her final week, she pressed her cameo locket into Dalton's hand, the one her grandmother had carried through Ellis Island, and told him it belonged to Rory someday. "Tell him it points home too," she said. After the funeral, the locket went into her jewelry box. 6 months later, it was gone. Dalton tore the house apart twice. He blamed the movers. He blamed his own grief. Eventually, he stopped talking about it because every mention put a crack in Rory's face that took days to heal. That missing locket became the one case Dalton Creel never solved. Remember it. He met Annika Duval 2 years after Celia passed, and the meeting was so smooth it should have squeaked with suspicion. She showed up at an estate auction where Dalton was appraiser of record, polished, funny, the kind of woman who remembered your coffee order the second time she saw you. She worked for her mother's company, Duval Estate Liquidations, the largest estate sale outfit in that corner of Maryland. Her mother, Henrietta Duval, was a fixture in 3 counties, church every Sunday, hugging grieving widows at funerals one week and selling everything their dead husbands left behind the next. People called her a saint. Henrietta ran her family the way she ran her sales. Everything tagged, everything priced, everything hers. Her son Rudy drove the box truck. Her daughter Joelle kept the books. Annika was the closer, the one who sat at grieving families' kitchen tables and got the paperwork signed. Dalton, a widower with a paid-off house, a respected license, and a lonely kid at home, never stood a chance. He didn't realize he'd already been appraised, priced, and sold to himself. The wedding was small, and the takeover was total. Within a year, Henrietta sold her own farmhouse through her own company and moved into the in-law suite, bringing a massive locked oak cupboard wrapped in moving blankets like a coffin. "It's Louis XV," she told Dalton. "Family pieces. Sentimental." She kept the only key on a ribbon around her neck. Dalton, a man who'd spent his career respecting other people's locks, let it be. That was the year things turned cold for Rory. Annika's warmth toward the boy developed a schedule on when Dalton was home, off the moment he travelled. Rory's drawings disappeared off the fridge to make room for cruise brochures. His seat at Sunday dinner drifted to the end of the table, then a folding chair, then a plate left on the counter. Joelle's twins got new bikes. Rory got told 11 was old enough to stop expecting Christmas to be a production. Henrietta talked about him in the third person while he stood right there. The boy tracks mud. He's the previous administration. Dalton did push back, and here's how good these people were. Every time he raised a concern, the scene flipped before he finished his sentence. Annika would cry real tears and ask if he knew what it felt like to compete with a dead woman. Henrietta would murmur that grief makes fathers see monsters where there's only growing pains. They were fluent in the grammar of making a decent man doubt his own eyes. His travel schedule did the rest. He called home every night, and Annika held the phone up so he could hear a household that sounded warm. Rory learned to say, "I'm fine, Dad," in a voice engineered not to worry anyone. Kids protect the one parent they have left. It's the bravest, saddest thing in the world, and it works, which is the problem. That October, Dalton took a 3-week contract outside Charleston, the biggest fee of his year, a job he'd almost turned down. Annika practically packed his bags. Her whole family had been humming with private excitement for weeks, conversations that stopped when he entered a room. He chalked it up to the Duvals being the Duvals. He kissed Rory's head and drove south. The job collapsed 19 days in when a dispute between heirs froze the estate. The client paid out his contract and sent everyone home. Dalton didn't call ahead. He still can't fully explain why. Some instinct that the story he'd been told about his own house wouldn't survive an unannounced inspection. He drove 11 hours straight through the night, and at 4 minutes past midnight turned onto Tillman Street and found his home standing dark. Not a sleep dark, empty, dark, no cars, no porch light, just one thin blade of yellow bleeding from under the basement door and the sound of a dryer turning. There, at the folding table, his 12-year-old son, working through a laundry basket like a boy who's done this alone many times before. Rory looked up. "Dad, don't be mad. I was going to have it all put away before Sunday." "Where is everyone?" Rory shrugged. "Cruise. They left Tuesday. It's on the fridge." The note was in Henrietta's handwriting, held up by a Duval magnet. "Took the family on a cruise. 5 days, Bahamas, my treat. There's money for pizza. The boy isn't invited. He's your mistake, not ours. Signed simply H." Dalton read it twice, aware of his own heartbeat, 30 years of his mother's voice repeating, "We don't take what isn't ours," and something colder assembling behind his ribs. They'd left a 12-year-old alone for 5 days and put it in writing, because it had never occurred to any of them that Dalton was anything more than the house they lived in. He folded the note and slid it into his jacket. Then Rory, still folding laundry, said the words that changed everything. "Dad, I found something unbelievable in Grandma's cupboard." Henrietta kept the key around her neck, but in her rush to leave she hadn't noticed the little lower door didn't latch if you pressed it right. Dalton followed his son down the hall, watched him press a knuckle into the carved rosette, and the door slid open. Dalton looked inside, and then, exhausted, betrayed, he began, very slowly, to smile. The upper shelves were theatre, hymnals, a porcelain shepherdess. But the lower compartment was a filing system, and Dalton had spent 20 years learning what honest paperwork looks like, which meant dishonest paperwork glowed in the dark to him. 9 accordion folders, each labelled with a surname and a year. Swan, 2019. Abernathy, 2021. 7 more. Inside the first, a will, a power of attorney, a codicil, 3 different elderly signatures, all witnessed by the same 2 names in what his trained eye read instantly as one hand disguising itself twice. Beneath the folders, a cigar box full of rings, each tagged with Duval lot numbers matched to names and dates, trophies, inventoried like stock, because Henrietta never met a thing she loved that she didn't also price. And third from the left, tagged lot 44C, a cameo locket on a worn gold chain. Celia's locket, the one unsolved case of Dalton's career, sitting in his mother-in-law's cupboard with a price on it. Rory clutched a folded shirt like a shield. "That's Mum's, isn't it? Dad, why does Grandma have Mum's necklace?" That's why he smiled. It was a picture, finally resolving, the way a forged signature resolves, under magnification. The courtship that had found him instead of the other way around. The saint of 3 counties who hugged widows on Sunday and sold their houses on Monday. A locket only someone with a key could have taken. He wasn't holding a family secret. He was holding an entire operation, and thanks to a cheap latch and 1 curious little boy, he had 5 full days on the clock, while every player floated the Bahamas aboard a ship called the Coral Sovereign, certain they'd gotten away with everything. Dalton put his arm around his son. "Buddy, you didn't do anything wrong, and you're not spending another night in this house alone." Then he photographed the note and started making a list. He didn't touch the folders that night. An amateur grabs the evidence, and 6 months later, a defense attorney turns the amateur into the criminal. Dalton photographed the cupboard exactly as found, pressed the door flush, took Rory upstairs and made them eggs at 1 in the morning, letting the boy talk for the first time in over a year. Forgotten school pickups, a birthday dinner quietly rescheduled and never put back. The way Annika's voice changed the instant Dalton's car left the driveway. The real reason for the midnight laundry. Whenever Rory left his clothes in the machine during the day, they ended up dumped on the garage floor. Grandma's rule was that his things didn't share a drum with family. By morning, the cold thing inside Dalton had finished assembling. He called his client and asked him to say nothing about the job ending early. Then he called Priscilla Vang, who ran the Elder Justice Unit out of the State Attorney General's office and had used him as an expert witness in 4 forgery prosecutions. He met her that afternoon and talked for 40 minutes without raising his voice. Priscilla scrolled the cupboard photos twice, then asked, "Mr. Creel, do you know what the Swan matter is?" He didn't. Loretta Swan had been a widow whose estate sale triggered a complaint from her daughter in Oregon, who swore her mother's will had changed in her final months, cutting the family out for a caretaking friend nobody could locate afterward. The complaint died for lack of evidence. There had been 2 others just like it, a lonely elder, a late new will, a helpful friend, an estate sale that converted everything to cash fast. Nobody had ever connected the dots because they were scattered across jurisdictions and the paperwork always held up. Dalton enlarged the witness signatures on the swan codicil and turned the screen around. Paperwork holds up until someone who reads pressure and pen lift looks at it, and then it testifies for the other side. By 6 that evening, Priscilla had a prosecutor on the phone. By 9 the next morning, a judge signed the warrant, and Dalton unlocked his own front door for an evidence team, pressed the rosette himself, and stepped aside. What they pulled from that cupboard over the next 2 days redrew the map of 9 families' grief. The folders held originals. The real wills, predating the forgeries, kept the way blackmailers keep photographs, because Henrietta was too much of a collector to burn even the evidence that could hang her. The cigar box gave investigators lot tags matching sale ledgers Joelle kept in a cloud account, leading to buyers. A locksmith's afternoon with the lower drawer produced the masterpiece, a decades-old leather address book grading elderly clients like livestock. Widowed, no local kids, lonely. Looks promising? One page, headed Creel, dated 14 months before Dalton ever met Annika, read, "Appraiser, widower, house paid off. License is the asset. Annika to work the sale. The boy is a complication." Dalton read it 3 times. His marriage had a provenance too, and he'd missed it, made in his own kitchen. The evidence team found one final item taped behind the cupboard's back panel, an envelope of texts and photos even Henrietta had considered leverage. Annika with a man at a marina bar, the same man at a realtors' conference. 3 years of messages. The man was Lyman Crow, the probate attorney whose name appeared as drafting counsel on all 9 forged estates. The affair predated Dalton's wedding and simply continued through it, a business partnership disguised as romance. Crow drew the paper. Henrietta worked the widows. Annika worked the marks. And the mark of record, whose signature had quietly certified Duval's sale inventories for 3 years, was Dalton himself. He stood alone in the garage in the dark for a while after that. Then he came back inside because there were 3 days left and a trap to finish. Everyone who could warn anyone else was on the same boat, sealed inside a steel hull in the Atlantic, paying $11 a minute for satellite internet, while their cupboard sat in an evidence room being photographed, page by page. Priscilla's team used that window like a gift. Subpoenas went to banks with no time to tip anyone off. Loretta Swan's daughter overnighted a handwriting sample her mother had kept. Chester Abernathy's grandson drove down with his grandfather's real will, the one the family always insisted existed, and Lyman Crow, the only player still on land, got handled with a con worthy of the Duvals themselves, a call dangling a fictional fat estate, recommended by Henrietta Duval herself. Crow took the meeting and, fishing for his fee, explained his own standard arrangement in the past tense, complete with names. When 2 agents at the next table introduced themselves, Crow asked 4 words that told you everything about that family's loyalty. What did Henrietta keep? He flipped before sundown. In exchange for a plea, he gave Priscilla the entire architecture. 9 estates over 11 years, roughly $2.4 million moved through sales. A 10th file already open, a retired ferry captain named as next spring's target. And one detail that mattered most. The Creel marriage had been planned like an acquisition, complete with a timetable. Year 1, joint accounts. Year 3, a revised will, moving Rory's inheritance, the house and Dalton's death benefits under Annika's control, Henrietta as backup trustee. They were in year 3. The boy was to be sent to boarding school in Virginia the moment the ink dried. They had priced Rory too. That night, Dalton sat on the end of his son's bed and told him the truth, plainly. Some of the people in this house did very bad things for money, and they'll answer for it. None of it was ever about you, and the cupboard you weren't supposed to open is going to give 9 families their parents back." Rory asked. "So, the laundry thing is over?" Dalton told him yes. From now on, they'd do it together, on Sundays, loud like they owned the place. Because they did. They always had. The Coral Sovereign came up the Chesapeake on the morning of the 5th day. The Duvals came down the gangway in matching T-shirts Henrietta had printed. Duval family, blood runs true, sunburned and laughing. Henrietta was first, as always, and the first to see the woman in the grey suit holding up credentials flanked by investigators and police. She tried the same soft-face transformation that had worked for 30 years, right up until Priscilla said, "Search warrant, Tillman Street, executed Tuesday." Henrietta's hand shot involuntarily to the ribbon at her neck, to the key of a cupboard 200 miles away that was already empty. That gesture ended up in the trial exhibits as consciousness of guilt. Rory, who watched the footage once, years later, called it what it was, Grandma checking on her stuff. Annika was taken at the bottom of the gangway, scanning the crowd for someone who wasn't there, and it wasn't her husband. Rudy made it 30 yards toward a taxi stand before he was stopped. Joelle was crying before anyone reached her, and by Monday her lawyer had called Priscilla to talk. Dalton wasn't at the terminal. Priscilla told him most men would want to watch. He turned her down because that Friday was a school day, and he'd promised Rory pancakes and a hardware store run to rebuild the latch on that cupboard door for whichever family needed it next. The real revenge happened over the following year, executed with an appraiser's patience, entirely inside the lines. Dalton's testimony walked the jury signature by signature through all 9 forged instruments, and the state's forensic examiner confirmed every call he made. Henrietta was convicted on 26 counts: forgery, theft by deception, financial exploitation, racketeering. She got 22 years, and the judge told her she had run a harvest, not a business, and had mistaken other people's twilight years for her own private field. Annika took 8 years on a plea, and the marriage was annulled, erased on grounds of fraudulent inducement, a legal category that exists for weddings that were actually acquisitions. Crow was disbarred and served 30 months. Rudy and Joelle drew lesser sentences, and civil forfeiture clawed back the farmhouse profits, the boat, every account Joelle had kept, into a restitution fund distributed to 9 families plus 1 retired ferry captain who got the strangest good news of his life. "Sir, you were next, and you're safe now." And the locket came home. Dalton followed the legal process for reclaiming stolen property from evidence, calling that form the most satisfying paperwork of his career. On Rory's 13th birthday, he placed the cameo locket, cleaned, restrung, its provenance finally proven in a court of law, into his son's hands, and told him exactly what Celia had said years before. It points home too. Rory wears it inside his shirt on the days that matter most. The in-law suite became a workshop where a teenager takes apart clocks and puts them back together better, at a bench by the window, right where his mother would have wanted it. Duval Estate Liquidation's client list was picked up at auction by an honest competitor who hired as their new authentication consultant a man named Dalton Creel. The first thing he did was print a rule on every contract: we don't take what isn't ours, because a thing you steal never stops belonging to somebody else. And on Sundays, with every basement light on and the front door unlocked, a father and his son do the laundry together, loud, like they own the place. Because every con in this story ran on the same fuel, the certainty that decent people don't look closely. Henrietta hugged widows because grief doesn't audit.